Welcome to Search Committee Training. This training and printed materials will not be publicly available online, but you can email the Office of Human Resources to request a PDF of the training. The training was designed so that you can easily reference information throughout your search process. The table of contents is linked to each section and to the documents and templates so you can quickly skip to different sections. We'll look at the documents or templates as we review each section, and they are available in a Word document for the search chair upon request. This training was developed in partnership with University Council to provide hiring best practices that support the university's guiding principles fostering diversity among its faculty, staff, and students. Anyone serving on a search committee is required to take the training by either attending this session, watching the recorded training, or reading the printed training materials. It can also be helpful to anyone conducting a search, even if a formal search committee isn't required. The training aligns with our equal employment opportunity and affirmative action commitment and statement. At the bottom of the page, we've included a shortened EEO-AA statement that should be included in all job advertisements placed by individual departments. These sections talk about what a search committee is and the responsibilities. The purpose of the search committee is to screen applicants based on clearly defined and objective criteria. And when you agree to serve on a search committee, you agree to follow this list of responsibilities. The first bullet point is a link to a checklist for hiring managers. It contains all the information the hiring manager needs to provide to the search chair and committee. When the hiring manager is selecting the chair and committee, the best practice is that the chair has at least served on an MUW search committee before and is familiar with the process. While all the responsibilities are important, I do want to mention the importance of maintaining confidentiality during and after the search to uphold the integrity of the search. Also, search members cannot have a conflict of interest. Search members who have a personal or professional relationship with candidates must disclose it to the chair or the hiring manager. We're a small community and a small university, so it's likely search members will know candidates, and that's okay as long as it's disclosed and determined by the chair or hiring manager that the relationship will not influence or appear to influence the search. If there's a question, then recusal may be necessary. Search members aren't allowed to serve as references for applicants or provide reference letters. This also applies when a formal search committee isn't required. For example, when HR hires for a position, our entire staff is part of the process. We all review applications and participate in the interviews. So if an applicant listed Margaret Hayward as a reference, she would have to decline since she's part of the hiring decision. The search committee needs to read Avoiding Legal Issues prior to reviewing applications, but the takeaway is to have clearly defined criteria for evaluating applicants, be consistent in your methods, and ask the same questions of all applicants. Make sure that all portions of the interviews are accessible to persons with disabilities and questions address job-related abilities. Other points worth mentioning are, per Mississippi Code, search committees are encouraged to advance qualified veterans to the screening stage if they meet the minimum qualifications. Assume that you will need to legally defend your final decision, so document your search accordingly, and search documents must be maintained for 3 years from the hire date. Legally permissible questions. When you review the questions, you'll see that you need to stick with questions that pertain to the job and the candidate's ability to perform the job. Stay away from questions that seem like you are fishing for personal information, family life, etc. You should also ask questions of all candidates. There could be situations where someone may ask you about schools or maybe elder care, and you can respond with information, but you should avoid asking how many children do you have, or what age are your children, or even how much time do you spend helping your parents. I also want to point out there's an exception to the question about citizenship for patrol officers and dispatchers because U.S. citizenship is required to hold these positions. This requirement is clearly stated in the job postings for both patrol officers and dispatchers, and the application includes a disqualifying question about citizenship. It's also important to read the Americans with Disabilities Act section, as it addresses what you can and cannot ask of applicants or candidates. ADA prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of a disability, except that a person must be qualified and able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without an accommodation. When contacting candidates to arrange interviews, ask all whether they will need an accommodation during the interview process. You should contact HR or university counsel if an accommodation is requested. It is acceptable to ask candidates if they can perform the job duties with or without an accommodation, but you must ask everyone this question. You should never ask if a disability or medical condition would interfere with the ability to work. Limit questions to performing the essential functions of the job and not about a diagnosis or information about their medical condition or disability. During the initial search committee meeting, you're going to discuss your charge, sign the confidentiality agreement, review the job description, discuss advertising, establish the search timeline, determine your evaluation rubrics, and how you'll categorize applicants. The chair may also assign members to specific tasks. This section contains links to all the documents you'll need, but before we look at the links, I want to encourage you to set an efficient timeline. If you have good qualified applicants and the search process drags on, you might lose your top applicants to other job opportunities. We'll quickly take a look at the first 3 documents. The other links take you to other sections of the training, but for training purposes, we're going to go in order and not jump around. The first one is the search committee kickoff meeting agenda. This is for the search chair when setting the agenda for the first initial meeting. This is a guideline of what needs to be discussed. The second one is the search committee charge invitation memo. This is going to come from the hiring manager. It is a formal invitation asking you to serve on the search committee, and it will also provide additional details about the expectations from the search committee. And the last one is the confidentiality agreement. You will sign this at the initial search meeting. You'll give it to the search chair, who will keep it with all of the other search documents. It's also important that the committee understand the current diversity of the department or unit and note any opportunities and strategies for diversity expansion and how to mitigate unconscious bias during the search process. The Higher Education Recruitment Consortium has a search committee toolkit that you may find helpful, and there is a link provided here. The initial meeting is where you'll develop your applicant review rubrics based on minimum and preferred qualifications and decide how you'll categorize the applications. We'll look at 2 rubric examples that you can modify specifically for your search. The first one is for a cabinet level position. The qualifications are based on the job description, and you'll rate the applicant based on if the qualifications are met or not. The experience is specific to this position, so the search committee will determine specific experience based on the requirements of the job. Experience and skills continue on the second page, and at the end, you'll select if you think the candidate can be effective in the position and also add additional comments, but remember to keep comments job related. The second example is for a staff position. It's the same format as the previous example, but this one is specific to the requirements of the patrol officer, which is why, if you'll notice at the bottom, it includes U.S. citizenship. If you remember, we talked about this during legally permissible questions, and it is a requirement specific to that job, and that's why it's included. The experience continues to the next page, and again, you'll select if you think the candidate can be effective and add comments. Search committee members will be given guest user access in People Admin to review applications. This is where you'll use the rubrics and evaluate applications based on the defined criteria. If any applicant doesn't meet a minimum job requirement qualification, this would be a required qualification, not preferred. It should be noted on the rubrics, and you'll not advance the applicant in the search. The search members will review applications on their own, not as a group, but it'll be easier if you set aside time to review applications at the same time instead of a few at a time. You'll want to look for red flags during the review. This is always difficult because you want to believe the best in people and not think an applicant is intentionally trying to be dishonest, but it does happen and it can be problematic, especially if the red flags are ignored and the applicant advances in the search. Not all red flags are deal breakers, but you certainly need to note any concerns and be prepared to ask for an explanation or more information if the applicant advances to the screening interview. We provided some examples as well as a link to an article that provides the top 10 red flags employers must heed. For training purposes, I copied the article in a document to make it easier to review, and we'll go over some of the highlights from the article. You want to ensure that the candidates you consider hiring are who they say they are and that their credentials are valid and match your needs. These red flags are the mistakes, errors, and indicators that give you a great deal of information about the individual who is applying for your open job. Employers ignore these red flags at their own risk. Also, as you look for these red flags, recognize that they may reflect the existing job market, bad advice from a career or placement expert, or desperation on the part of job searchers for their application materials to catch your attention. They may not represent the applicant's entire career. That said, certain flags you cannot ignore. For example, never hire an individual who lied to you. Employment gaps. These gaps include dates of employment listed only in years so that the actual day and month of employment ending are masked. An employment gap is not an impossible obstacle, but it's a critical question to ask in your telephone interview before you invest time in an interview on site. Spelling, grammar, and punctuation challenged resumes. They are indicative of what you can expect from the candidate as an employee. Attention to detail failures. Attention to detail will yield an overall impression of your candidate's carefulness and provide a picture of the candidate's potential success as an employee. Evidence that a career has gone backwards or plateaued. You need to ask questions if you see signs that a career is going backward or plateaued. There could be other circumstances causing a career to appear derailed. The problem you need to weigh is that smart candidates know this. They don't make potential employers ask. They explain their responsibility differences or the appearance of a career going backward in their resume or cover letter. Failure to follow directions. Not only does the applicant's failure to follow directions give you information about their potential success as an employee, it invalidates the application. You have the right to specify what you need from an applicant. Interview the candidates who give you what you requested. Ignoring a request for salary history. It's an age-old debate, and employers weigh in on both sides about the usefulness of publicizing a job salary range when posting a job. On the one hand, when the employer may have wiggle room for the right candidate, the employer feels that posting a salary excludes potential qualified applicants. On the other hand, applicants believe that they will disqualify themselves for jobs they may have accepted. Applicants also don't want to waste time applying for jobs that they can't consider because the pay is too low. It's also important to note that in an increasing number of jurisdictions, asking for a salary history is becoming illegal. These are posted online, and you can find a list of jurisdictions in the U.S. where asking for salary history is illegal. Resumes and applications that take advantage of the current employer. A resume or application that's emailed from a current employer's address is a red flag for employers and means they're probably job searching on their current employer's time. If your online job application takes an hour to fill out, a 2:30 p.m. timestamp can be another red flag. If they take advantage of their current employer, you know they'll take advantage of you. It's always possible the employee was off work when the application was submitted, but this is something you should pay attention to. Lack of resume customization for your job posting. Well-qualified applicants write a custom cover letter that draws a direct connection between the skills and experience you seek and the applicant's qualifications. Anything else is a red flag. When resumes and cover letters are customized, applicants have the opportunity to tell you that they have researched and understand your organization and how they can contribute. This is something that we see quite often. The applicant's cover letter is for an entirely different position or organization. Overqualified applicants. In a tight job market, applicants may apply for jobs for which they are overqualified. You walk a fine line in selecting such a candidate, however. Your organization will benefit from their long-term experience and the knowledge they bring to your workplace, but the problem with an overqualified candidate is that they may leave and leave quickly. Depending on the success of their job search, employers need to decide whether the candidate's likely short-term tenure is offset by the value they'll bring. To make this decision, add in the cost of an entire search for another new employee and the cost of the loss to your workplace. Unusual employment history. Just as an employee with an employment gap is encouraged to provide a viable explanation on the resume or in the cover letter, an applicant with an atypical job history is expected to do the same. Job hopping doesn't carry the stigma that it did many years ago, and employers are no longer as loyal to employees as they were in another era. But a series of short-term positions is still a red flag to examine. When considering an employee, multiple careers and job shifts need an explanation for each. Prospective employers need to comfortably question potential employees about any details in their application materials that raise red flags. In conclusion, red flags are not complete barriers, but these are things to look for and ask about. If something doesn't seem right or you aren't comfortable with a candidate's answers or explanation, then be okay with not advancing them in the search. The search chair will need to inform the hiring manager about potential red flags and whether the explanation meets the hiring standards set forth if the candidate is recommended for hire. I also want to share with you some of the red flags that HR has seen. Keep in mind that red flags may not be revealed during the application review or even the interview, but may show up during the background check phase. Even if a candidate makes it through to the end of the search and there are red flags in the background check, don't ignore them just because you thought the search was complete or you don't feel the second candidate is a strong choice. We know no one wants to have a failed search, but it's better than hiring someone who had red flags that were ignored. So a department had a candidate who was selected for hire, and when it came time for people admin to send the background release authorization form, the email bounced back as invalid. It was the candidate's current work email. We made some phone calls and found out that the candidate had indeed left employment, and not only did they not disclose this information in the final interview, they talked about taking off work to come to the interview. The deceit about current employment created a distrust with the hiring manager who saw the potential problem and rescinded the offer. The candidate could have had valid reasons for leaving employment, but that maybe wouldn't have prevented a job offer, but the deception was the issue. Another example is if a LinkedIn profile or other professional profiles don't list the same employment as the resume or application, or the dates of employment are inconsistent between the resume and application. You need to pay attention to employment details and inconsistencies and ask questions. In this situation, when the background check was complete, an employer listed on the resume couldn't verify employment and, in fact, stated they didn't even know the person. This employment had been omitted from the application, but was included in great detail on the resume. The hiring manager rescinded the offer. The last example is when the application specifies that we may not contact current and past employers. While I understand not contacting the current employer, we need to be able to contact past employers. If you see this in an application, ask the candidate about it. If they remain firm about not contacting employers, then we have no way of doing our due diligence in the hiring process, and HR would recommend not moving forward with the candidate. When you have your review meeting, the search members should have completed their application rubrics for all applicants and ready to discuss the candidates. If any of the candidates don't meet the minimum qualifications, you cannot advance them in the search. You'll want to determine how many applicants to advance to a screening interview. You want to make sure you have a good number going into the screening interview in case you have candidates withdraw during the process. Know the policy requirements for hiring faculty or director level or above positions and how many on-campus interviews are required based on policy. We have provided the links to the policies here. The screening interview is going to help narrow down the applicants to determine who will be the finalist candidates for the campus interview. I want to mention here that as you go through the various interview phases, try to keep interviews within a few days of each other instead of spread over weeks when possible. I know finding times that meet everyone's schedule is hard, but this will help expedite the timeline. You can have more than one screening interview. Depending on the position, you may want to start with a screening email and then advance candidates to either a phone or Zoom screening interview before doing campus interviews. But whatever method you use during the screening, make sure it's the same for all candidates. The screening interview is a good time to mention the salary range and see if the candidate is still interested in the position. You don't want to waste their time or yours, as well as university resources, to bring a candidate to campus only to find out they will not be willing to accept the job for the salary offered. At the end of the interview, you can say something like, "The position is budgeted for $50,000. Are you still interested?" It's possible the candidate may bring up the salary before you do, and you can respond with this statement. You'll want to develop questions ahead of time that will be asked of all candidates, but even though you'll ask the same questions, you can use this as an opportunity to clarify information or get additional information from a candidate. For example, ask about gaps in employment, or maybe there's something you thought was a red flag and you want clarification. An email screening is used a lot for staff positions, but it can also be a good way to narrow down qualified applicants before the phone or Zoom screening interview. The email screening can provide more information about the applicant than just the answers to the questions. For example, when we hire in HR, we send an email to all applicants who meet the minimum qualifications. Some questions we don't expect the applicant to know the answer, but we want to see what initiative they'll take to find the answer. If the applicant answers, "I don't know what that is, but I learn new tasks quickly, so I'm confident I can be trained," we most likely will not advance them because all they had to do was a quick Google search, but they didn't take the initiative to do that. We also give a deadline for responding, and anyone who doesn't respond by the deadline isn't advanced in the search. Deadlines are extremely important in HR. When you get ready for the telephone screening interview, schedule the time in advance with the applicants and allow enough time on the call to have follow-up questions. When you schedule it, let them know approximately how long the interview will take and try to stick to the time allotted. You want to be flexible, but you also want each interview to have equal time. We have some sample questionnaires for both faculty and non-faculty positions that we'll look at that can be modified to your specific search. We'll get to the reference checks later, but you can ask about checking references during the phone interview. Please remember to reference avoiding legal issues or legally permissible questions if needed. The first one is for faculty, and you can see that we included a sample email to send to the applicant to schedule the phone interview. This is where you can ask permission about references and provide the budgeted salary. You'll want to document who conducted the phone interview and who participated. The second page continues with questions, and you want to make notes about each answer. The next one is for staff positions, but it's the same format. And of course, you'll want to change the questions to be related to the position. And it's also 2 pages. Final candidate interviews should be conducted in person on campus. Of course, during COVID, we conducted final interviews by Zoom, but it's really important for candidates to be on campus and to have that personal interaction with them. However, if there are extenuating circumstances that prohibit a campus interview, the committee should get approval from the hiring manager. Candidates should be interviewed by the same method, so it could create an issue if some can and want to come to campus, so keep that in mind. When contacting candidates about the campus visit, be sure to ask all candidates if an accommodation will be needed. If so, refer to the section on ADA and notify HR University Council. Asking about accommodations in advance will help you plan where the candidate will stay, transportation, interview locations, etc. Don't wait to ask this right before the visit, or you could be scrambling to change plans at the last minute. Once plans are finalized, you can ask the candidate if it will meet their needs. The committee should create a schedule for campus interviews, and here is a sample interview schedule. You should be as detailed as possible when making arrangements for a campus visit. Thoughtfully consider who the candidate should meet with and also plan a campus tour. You'll want to let the candidates know the relevance of each person they are meeting with and ask if there is anyone they would like to meet with or if they have particular questions that may be best answered by individuals outside of the interview process. They should have a 15-minute meeting scheduled with HR for a benefits overview because benefits can be a big part of a candidate's decision to accept a job. Try to schedule some short breaks during the day, but avoid large gaps of time. Good planning will help make the visit run smoothly. Remember, just as we want the candidate to make a good impression on us, we want to make a good impression on the candidate. A poorly scheduled campus interview can reflect negatively on the university. Confirm appointments a few days before the visit and provide the candidate and other departments with a copy of the itinerary. Number 10 has a list of those who might need the itinerary, such as the dean, department faculty, president, cabinet, student groups, etc. If the candidate is making a presentation, you'll send a notice to campus or maybe just to the departments depending on the position. One question I get asked about is sharing the candidate's resume or CV. We no longer provide resumes or CVs to campus as a security measure since it contains personal information for the candidate. However, it can be shared with small groups on the interview schedule. Emailing the resume or CV the day prior to the group interview is acceptable. For the campus presentation, the chair usually gives a short bio with career highlights during the introduction that gives the attendees some professional background information. The search committee should prepare a list of interview questions based on the job criteria and review it in advance to ensure they do not reflect any hidden bias or assumptions. We've provided a list of common behavioral interview questions that you may want to include with job-related questions. The search committee needs to provide an interview rubric for each interviewing group, including the search committee interview. Here's a sample you can edit for the position. Many of you have used or completed this form before if you attended a campus presentation or if you were part of a smaller interview group. The search committee will collect the rubrics and use them in your final meeting to discuss the candidates. And this is a 2-page rubrics. We've also provided some links in number 13 that you can share with the candidates to provide more information about the area. The last point here is also one I get asked a lot. Internal candidates should have the same schedule as external candidates. The only exception is that they don't have to meet with HR on the interview day, but please inform HR if there is an internal candidate. Depending on the employee's current position and the position they're interviewing for, HR may need to discuss the optional retirement plan or whether the new position will prompt a payroll change from the biweekly to the monthly payroll. Let's look at some scenarios that reinforce why it's important to plan ahead for the interviews. Scenario 1. As a member of the search committee, you are charged with picking up Dr. Mike Johnson from the airport. You volunteer for this assignment because you have just acquired a new red 2-door Mercedes convertible and are happy to share your vehicle with others. You're excited about meeting this candidate. Although no one at the university has ever worked with Dr. Johnson, he has excellent qualifications and comes highly recommended. You get to the airport just in time for the flight to arrive and wait at the baggage claim with a sign. You hear someone behind you say, "Good afternoon, I'm Mike Johnson." When you turn around, you see that Dr. Johnson is sitting in a motorized scooter. Suddenly you realize that Dr. Johnson has a disability and you are not prepared to accommodate his scooter or other possible needs with your small car. This is a good example of why it's so important to ask about accommodations during scheduling. This scenario could have been avoided with a simple question before scheduling the campus visit. Scenario 2. As a member of the search committee, you are charged with taking the candidate to dinner. You pick up Dr. Jan Smith at her hotel and head for dinner at a nice local restaurant. During dinner, you have a great conversation about each other's research successes and failures. Then the candidate switches the conversation to the personal realm and asks if you are married and have children. When you share that you have 2 children, she begins to ask questions about schools, family benefits, and the university support of working parents. During this conversation, you learn that the candidate is a single parent with 2 daughters, ages 3 and 8. She expresses that her children are the most important part of her life and that she is constantly seeking ways to balance family and career. While you want to engage with the candidate, you have to remember to keep questions job-related and about professional information, not personal. You don't want to ask questions like, "How will you manage childcare?" or "Do you want to have more children?" Reference checks should be conducted on all final candidates in addition to the references completed in People Admin. You should still contact references even if they completed the form in People Admin. Most of the time, the search committee will contact references after campus interviews, but there could be some instances when reference checks may help narrow down who is brought to campus. The search committee needs to develop a form for checking references so consistent questions are asked. Here's a sample of non-faculty reference questions that can be modified to your search. Before checking references, you may want to review the sections on ADA and legally permissible questions just to ensure compliance, and it's also recommended that more than one committee member participate in reference checks to ensure there is no bias. In the job posting, the hiring manager has the option to choose when references are solicited, and People Admin automatically sends the reference request based on this setting. For the most part, references are solicited when the applicant completes their application, but for some faculty or cabinet level positions, the hiring manager may not want to solicit references until the applicant is selected for a screening interview. If the hiring manager chooses this option, the applicants must be moved in what we call workflow in People Admin, or references won't be solicited. Only the hiring manager or HR can move applicants, so the search chair will need to provide the names of those advancing to the hiring manager. Guest users only have view access and cannot perform this function. I also want to point out that the applicant has no control on whether the references respond to the email request. It could be the reference ignored the email, or maybe it went to their spam since it comes from the HR info email address. References not responding is not always a red flag, but it can be. If the reference is surprised to be listed or has no professional connection to the candidate, then it could be a red flag. I've also seen applicants provide an invalid email or their own email for references instead of the reference's actual email address. When asked, it was because the applicant wanted control over when the references were requested or who was contacted for the reference. This certainly can be a red flag, and in the cases I'm referring to, it turned out to be a big red flag. So if you notice something odd with reference emails, discuss it with the committee or HR and be prepared to ask the candidate about it. When checking references, you should contact both on-list and off-list references. On-list are references provided by the applicant. Off-list references may be former or current supervisors or colleagues. Prior to contacting off-list references, you should inform the candidate and ask permission. Remember, this was included in the telephone interview template. Some candidates may not want their current supervisor or colleagues contacted because they don't want them to know they're job searching. That's understandable. However, if the candidate does not give permission to contact former supervisors or colleagues, this could be problematic, and the search committee should see if they can find out the reason or at what point they could contact off-list references. If they won't allow it, the committee should really consider whether they'll move forward with the candidate, since their ability to fully complete the search process is being limited, as I mentioned earlier. The next two headings reiterate what we've covered already, but I do want to read the first few sections under the faculty heading because it applies to other positions. Because colleges and universities must repose a high degree of trust in their faculties, they are justified in attempting to ascertain whether candidates are worthy of that trust. For this reason, they ordinarily charge search committees with the responsibility of conducting thorough checks of a candidate's references and of interviewing a candidate's present and former colleagues. Search committees should take this responsibility very seriously. Now the search is complete and you have your final meeting. Committee members should bring all their search materials to this meeting and participate in the discussion of the candidate to recommend. The chair will prepare a final justification of selection report to the hiring manager, and this is the template to use. Committee members will turn over search materials to the chair, and either the chair or the hiring manager will keep search documents in a confidential file for 3 years from the hire date. The chair will also need to provide the hiring manager with reasons applicants or candidates were not interviewed, not hired, and interviewed, not hired. Applicants must be categorized in People Admin before a posting can be filled, and here is a list of reasons that are in People Admin. The reasons are divided by those interviewed and those not interviewed. Just so you know how this works, it's important to select a reason as to why the applicant was interviewed or not hired so that we can categorize applications in People Admin. Until this step is complete, HR can't fill the position in People Admin. When the position is filled, the applicants receive an email informing them another candidate was selected for the position. It's not a good reflection on the university when jobs go unfilled for long periods after the selection is finalized. HR will start to get calls or emails from applicants. The position should be filled in People Admin prior to a hiring announcement or press release. We've actually had applicants email HR after they received the email from People Admin saying, "This is old news," and they knew they weren't selected because an announcement was already made about who was hired. I find that a little bit embarrassing. Applicants can see news on the website or look in the campus directory, so even if an official announcement isn't made, they can still find out if the position has been filled before they're officially notified. The best practice is to follow the People Admin process and fill the position in the system to trigger the notification process. The last section is a list of what to include in the final report, and you can refer to the justification of selection report that we just saw as an example. This is the list of all the documents and templates that were referenced in the training, and starting on page 20, they are included in this order. You can easily find the one you need in the table of contents by clicking on the document name. We hope this training will help you have a successful search, and please reach out to Human Resources if you have any questions or would like to receive any of the printed materials.